A runaway mistaken for a nanny, left in charge of a millionaire's 3 kids. But when he comes home early, he discovers something that shocks everyone. Comment giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The metallic screech of the train wheels echoed like war drums as the 30-year-old woman sprinted through Grand Central Terminal, her ragged breath mingling with the humid air rising from the damp concrete. Her green eyes, bloodshot with terror, darted constantly over her shoulder, as if every shadow concealed the nightmare she'd just escaped. The worn-out backpack slapped against her thin frame, carrying everything that was left of a life that had nearly cost her everything. Her hands trembled as she clutched the crumpled paper with a scribbled address, the ink blurred by the relentless New York rain. Each purple bruise on her arms told a story of violence she desperately tried to forget. Each scar, a reminder of nights she prayed she wouldn't see dawn. The marriage that should have been a dream had morphed into a hell of shouting, threats, and fists that knew no mercy. The escape had been planned for months, every detail carefully orchestrated during the brief moments he left for work. The money hidden dollar by dollar in the bottom of a cookie jar, the documents tucked away in a drawer he never opened, and the courage gathered drop by drop like rain in a leaky bucket. When she finally mustered the strength to leave, she knew there was no turning back. The address led her through streets she didn't recognize, neighborhoods where the houses grew in size and the fences grew taller. Her feet ached inside her worn sneakers, but adrenaline still surged through her veins when she finally stopped before an imposing wrought-iron gate. The mansion behind the bars looked like something out of a movie, with perfectly manicured lawns and windows that glittered like jewels against the light-colored stone. She checked the paper again, confused. This couldn't be the right place. A woman like her, fleeing with only a backpack and despair as her companion, had no reason to be standing before such opulence. But before she could turn and leave, an elderly woman appeared on the inside of the gate, her kind eyes lighting up with recognition. "You must be the new nanny," the woman said, quickly unlocking the entrance. "I'm so glad you arrived early. I'm the housekeeper for the family, but I need to leave today to take care of my sick mother. The children are waiting for you." Confusion clouded her thoughts. Nanny. She had never applied for any job, let alone in a house like this. But the gate was already open, and the housekeeper was gently pulling her inside, rattling off a list of schedules, meals, and routines that seemed otherworldly. "Mr. Sterling is in an important meeting at the office and can't be disturbed," the older woman continued, as they walked through the main entryway, where a crystal chandelier hung like a captured constellation. He left all the instructions on the kitchen counter. "The kids just finished breakfast and are in the playroom." The interior of the mansion left her breathless. White marble stretched like a frozen ocean beneath her feet, and the walls were adorned with artwork she'd only ever seen in books. Each piece of furniture seemed to have cost more than she made in an entire year when she still had a job, before he started forbidding her to work, isolating her from the outside world. "They're 3 little angels," the housekeeper said with a warm smile. "The twins just turned 4. They're identical but with completely different personalities. And there's the little girl, too. She seems like she's only 2 because of her delicate constitution. But she's actually 4, like her brothers. Their mother, well, that's not my place to say." Her voice dropped, filled with a sadness she immediately recognized. The pain of abandonment had a specific sound, an echo that resonated in broken hearts in similar ways. Before she could ask any questions, joyful shrieks echoed through the marble hallway. 3 children came running, their bare feet making a sound like rain on the stones. The twins were truly identical, with dark hair and brown eyes that shone with childish curiosity. But it was the girl who stole her heart instantly. Small and fragile, she ran straight into her arms as if she had known her for years. "Are you going to stay with us?" one of the boys asked, his voice filled with a cautious hope that broke something inside her. The last nanny left when Mommy called. The girl squeezed her neck tightly, whispering something that sounded like "finally" against her ear. The connection was instantaneous and inexplicable, as if every cell in her body recognized these children as her own. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back, focusing on the warmth of those little bodies against hers. "I need to go now," the housekeeper said, picking up a small suitcase near the door. "They've already had lunch, but dinner needs to be ready by 7. Mr. Sterling doesn't tolerate lateness." And then she was gone, leaving her alone with 3 children who were looking at her expectantly. The silence of the mansion seemed to weigh tons, broken only by the distant sounds of a meeting taking place somewhere on the upper floor. She knew she should leave, explain the mistake, find the real address where she should have gone. But the eyes of those children held her captive like golden chains. There was a hunger in them that she knew well, not for food or toys, but for genuine affection, for someone who looked at them as if they were the center of the universe. It was a hunger she carried herself, a void that had never been filled. "Will you read to us?" asked the other twin, holding up a colorful book. "Daddy never has time." Her answer came out without her being able to control it. "Of course I will." And at that moment, sitting on the floor of the playroom with 3 children scattered around her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. The danger that was chasing her seemed distant. The marks on her skin started to ache less. And for the first time since she could remember, she didn't feel afraid. But deep down in her mind, a voice whispered that this was too good to be true, that sooner or later reality would come to collect its price, and that perhaps being there was the biggest mistake of her life. The sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the marble hallway made her look up from the book she was reading to the children. Her heart leaped when a deep male voice approached, filled with authority and impatience. The 3 little ones cowered instinctively, as if they knew that tone well. "Where's the housekeeper?" The question cut through the air like a sharp blade. "And who are you?" She turned slowly, still holding the little girl in her arms, and came face to face with the most stunning man she had ever seen. Tall and imposing, he filled the doorway with a magnetic presence that made the air seem thicker. His dark eyes analyzed her with the precision of a surgeon, noticing every detail from her simple clothes to the protective way she held his daughter. Her voice came out shaky, but she forced herself to continue. "The housekeeper had to leave to take care of her mother. I'm the new nanny." The lie slipped from her mouth before she could think, driven by panic and the self-preservation instinct she had developed over the past few years. He studied her for long seconds, his eyes narrowing as if he could read her soul through her green irises. "I don't remember hiring anyone," he said, his voice filled with suspicion. "What's the name of the agency that sent you?" The silence stretched like an abyss between them. She could feel cold sweat trickling down her back as her mind frantically worked to find a plausible answer. The children remained quiet, as if they sensed the tension in the air. "The lady mentioned an agency, but she stammered, hugging the little girl tighter. "Maybe there was some confusion with the paperwork." He took a step forward, and she instinctively recoiled, a movement that did not go unnoticed by his observant eyes. There was something in her posture, in the way she protected the children, even when at a disadvantage, that intrigued him deeply. "Daddy, she read us stories," one of the twins said in a small but brave voice. "And she did different voices for each character. And she smells good," added the girl, hiding her face in her neck. "Not like medicine like the others." His expression softened almost imperceptibly as he listened to his children. She realized that there was something in those dark eyes beyond distrust, a vulnerability carefully hidden beneath layers of control and protection. "The other nannies didn't last long," he said, more to himself than to her. "My children can be demanding." She watched the three children who clung to her as if she were a lifeline, and something broke in her chest. She recognized in them the same thirst for love she carried, the same sense of abandonment she knew so well. "They're adorable," she said sincerely, her voice gaining strength for the first time since he had entered the room. Anyone would be lucky to take care of them. For a moment, something crossed his face, an expression she couldn't decipher. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, as if no one had ever said anything like that about his children before. "Do you have experience with children?" he asked, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The movement made the muscles ripple beneath the expensive dress shirt, and she quickly looked away. "Yes," she replied, thinking of the years she had cared for injured children in medical emergencies, before her life turned into a nightmare. "A lot of experience." References. The world seemed to stop. References meant contacts, records, traces that could lead him straight to her. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly, but the girl in her arms whispered something that sounded like "stay" in her ear. The references are with the agency." She lied again, hating herself for every false word. "Problems with the system. They said they'd send them later." He watched her for a few more seconds that seemed eternal. She could see the gears working in his mind, weighing risks and benefits with the precision of a businessman accustomed to making decisions that moved millions. "How much do you charge?" he finally asked. She had no idea how much a nanny earned, especially in a house like that. "Whatever's fair." An eyebrow rose, and she realized she had said something wrong. People in her position didn't leave the payment up to the employer. But before she could explain, he continued. 2-week trial, he said categorically. "If my children don't adapt, or if I discover any irregularities in your background, you're out the same day." 2 weeks. It was more time than she had dared to dream when she fled through Grand Central Terminal that morning. 2 weeks to figure out her next step, to heal the deepest wounds, to perhaps for the first time in her life, feel what it was like to be needed in a positive way. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The housekeeper returns on Monday. Until then, you'll sleep in the guest room on the 3rd floor. The children's meals are always punctual. They have a strict routine that can't be broken." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door, looking over his shoulder. "And one more thing." His voice carried a warning tone that made her swallow hard. "I don't tolerate lies in my house. If I find out you're hiding something important, you'll not only be fired, but you'll also face the legal consequences." After he left, she remained motionless for several minutes, processing what had just happened. She was inside the house of the most intimidating man she had ever met, taking care of 3 children she barely knew, living a lie that could explode at any moment. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt alive. The girl had fallen asleep in her arms during the tension of the conversation, and the twins were watching her with hopeful eyes. One of them approached and held her free hand. "Are you really gonna stay?" he asked with a vulnerability that almost made her cry. "Yes," she replied, and for the first time since she arrived, it wasn't a lie. "I'm gonna stay." But as she carried the girl to the sofa and sat down between the 2 boys to finish the interrupted story, a part of her mind couldn't stop thinking about his dark eyes, about the way he had analyzed her as if he could see through all her defenses. There was something about that man that attracted and terrified her in equal measure, an intensity that made her stomach clench in ways she preferred not to analyze. And a voice whispered in her head that those 2 weeks could change her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. From the upper floor came the muffled sound of him talking on the phone, his deep voice reverberating through the walls. And she couldn't help but wonder what kind of man had built a real estate empire, raised 3 children alone, and had eyes that seemed to hold secrets as deep as her own. The first few days in the mansion passed like a hazy dream, where she walked a tightrope between happiness and terror. The children clung to her in a way that touched places in her heart she didn't even know existed. But his constant presence around the house kept her in a permanent state of alert. He was watching her. Whenever she thought she was alone with the little ones, she felt the weight of his eyes on her, analyzing every movement, every word, every reaction. It was like being studied by a predator who hadn't yet decided if she was prey or just an intruder in his territory. On the fifth morning, while she was preparing the children's breakfast, her hands trembled as she held the hot pan. The sound of the metal clanging against the stove echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot, and she jumped back with a muffled scream, knocking over a cup that shattered against the tile floor. "Is everything all right?" His voice came from behind her, and she whirled around, leaning against the counter with her hands behind her back to hide the trembling. "Yes, just an accident," she stammered, but her eyes were already scanning the shattered pieces on the floor, assessing if any could be used as a weapon if she needed to defend herself. He approached slowly, as if she were a wounded animal that might bolt at any moment. As he bent down to pick up the larger shards, she noticed how careful his movements were, almost gentle, completely different from the brutality she had known in other men. "Do you always react like that to unexpected noises?" he asked without looking up. But she caught the genuine curiosity in his voice. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, but her hands continued to tremble as she grabbed a broom to sweep up the smaller fragments. "Your hands," he said softly, standing up and watching her with an intensity that made her feel naked. "They're scarred, old scars." She looked down instinctively, seeing the marks she had tried to hide with long sleeves. Cigarette burns he had extinguished on her skin during his fits of rage, cuts from when she had tried to defend herself with a knife and he had disarmed her, bruises that took months to disappear completely. "Kitchen accidents," she said quickly, turning her palms down. "Working in a restaurant is dangerous." But he had already seen, and there was something in his eyes that scared her more than any threat. It was recognition, as if he knew exactly what kind of accidents left marks like that. "Daddy, she promised we were going to make cookies today." The cheerful voice of one of the twins broke the tension, and she breathed a sigh of relief as the child ran into the kitchen, followed by his siblings. "Cookies?" he asked, one eyebrow arching in surprise. "If it's allowed," she said quickly, picking up the little girl when she reached out her arms. "I thought it would be a fun activity for them." "The last nanny said cooking with kids was too messy," commented the other twin, his voice filled with disappointment. She saw something flicker across his face, a shadow of sadness or perhaps guilt. She realized that he worked too much, that he tried to be both a father and a mother, but that the weight of responsibility prevented him from simply being present in the way his children needed him to be. "Mess can be cleaned up," she said, looking directly into his dark eyes. "Happy memories last forever." For a moment, time seemed to stop. He studied her with an intensity that made her stomach clench. But there was something different in that look. Less suspicion, more curiosity, as if she had said something that resonated somewhere deep inside him. "All right," he said finally. "But the kitchen needs to be spotless afterward." "Of course," she smiled, and it was the first time she had genuinely smiled since arriving at the mansion. The next 2 hours were magical. The children laughed in a way that echoed throughout the entire house, getting their hands covered in flour and chocolate, licking the bowl when they thought no one was looking. She found herself laughing too, a sound that hadn't come out of her throat in so long that she almost didn't recognize it as her own. She didn't realize he was watching from the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, until she turned to grab more sugar and found him there. There was something in his expression that she couldn't decipher, a mixture of surprise and something deeper, more vulnerable. "I haven't heard them laugh like that in so long," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Kids need to laugh," she replied, wiping flour off the little girl's face. "It's how they process happiness." "Do you have children?" The question came out before he could stop himself, and she felt the world stop for a second. "No," she said softly, an old pain piercing her chest. "I never had the opportunity." There was truth in those words. She had dreamed of having children when she was younger, before he destroyed all her dreams, before she discovered that some men see pregnancy as a form of total control, a prison from which a woman could never escape. "They've gotten attached to you very quickly," he observed, and there was something strange in his voice. "Maybe because I've gotten attached to them too," she admitted, and immediately regretted the honesty. At that moment, the little girl slipped in the high chair where she was sitting. Everything happened in slow motion, her falling towards the tile floor, the panicked scream of her brothers, and her moving faster than should have been possible. Her reflexes were automatic, trained by years working in medical emergencies. She caught the child in the air, cushioning the fall with her own body, twisting so that her back hit the floor first. The girl landed safely on top of her, only frightened but unharmed. My God! He was beside them in seconds, scooping his daughter out of her arms and checking her for injuries. "How did you move so fast?" She got up slowly, feeling the pain in her back where she had hit the floor, but completely ignoring her own condition as she watched him examine the child with trembling hands. "It's okay," she said softly. "She's fine." "You could have seriously injured yourself," he said, lifting his eyes to meet hers. "Why did you do that?" The question surprised her. As if protecting a child wasn't the most natural thing in the world. As if she had a choice between her own safety and that of someone so small and helpless. "Because it's my job," she said simply. "No." He shook his head, still holding his daughter against his chest. "That was beyond any job. That was—" He didn't finish the sentence, but continued to look at her with an intensity that made her heart race. Something was changing between them, an invisible barrier that was beginning to erode. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice husky with emotion. That night, after the children were in bed and she had retreated to the guest room, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment he had looked at her after she saved his daughter. The raw vulnerability in his dark eyes, the way his voice had trembled when he thanked her. There was something happening between them, something dangerous and magnetic that she couldn't allow to grow. She was there living a lie, hiding secrets that could destroy not only her own life, but potentially put those children in danger. But when she finally fell asleep, her dreams were filled with dark eyes and gentle hands, with the laughter of children and the feeling of belonging somewhere for the first time in her life. And deep down in her mind, a voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, 2 weeks wouldn't be enough to uncover all the secrets that house held, including her own. The second week brought a subtle but undeniable shift in the dynamic of the house. He started appearing more frequently during the day, always with some excuse related to work, but she noticed how his eyes followed her while she played with the children in the garden or prepared their meals. On Tuesday night, she was humming softly while folding the children's laundry when the sound of her own voice made her stop abruptly. It was a lullaby she had learned as a child, a simple melody that she sang to herself in the darkest moments as a way to maintain her sanity. That song, his deep voice cut through the silence behind her, making her whirl around. He was standing in the doorway, a strange expression on his face. "Where did you learn that?" I don't know," she stammered, her hands trembling slightly as she held a small shirt. "I guess I've always known it. My mother used to sing that song," he said slowly, entering the laundry room with measured steps. "Before she died, when I was still a child." The air between them seemed to grow thicker. She could feel the heat emanating from his body as he approached, could smell his cologne mixed with something more masculine and primal that made her stomach clench in confusing ways. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know. She died when I was 12 years old," he continued, his voice filled with a vulnerability she had never heard before. "Cancer." My father abandoned us 2 years before, said he couldn't handle her illness. The pain in his voice was so raw that she felt tears threaten her eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm lightly, a gesture of comfort that seemed to electrify the air between them. After that, I lived on the streets for years, he continued, not pulling away from her touch. I promised myself that if I ever had children, they would never feel the abandonment I felt. That's why you work so hard, she whispered, finally understanding the intensity with which he protected his family. And that's why I don't easily trust people, he said, his dark eyes meeting hers. But you're different. The world seemed to stop. They were so close that she could count the small scars on his face, probably from the time he lived on the streets. Her hand was still on his arm, and he covered it with his own, the touch sending waves of heat throughout her body. I'm not who you think I am, she said desperately, trying to pull away, but he held her hand more firmly. Then tell me who you are. His voice was just a whisper. Tell me the truth. For one terrible and wonderful moment, she almost gave in. Almost told him about the marriage that almost killed her, about the desperate escape, about how she had arrived there by chance and fallen in love with that broken family that mirrored her own need to belong somewhere. But before she could open her mouth, the sound of small feet running down the hallway broke the spell. They pulled away quickly as the little girl appeared in the doorway, crying softly. Nightmare, she said simply, reaching out her arms to her. The rest of the night passed in a haze of caring for the frightened child, but she couldn't stop thinking about the moment in the laundry room, about the way he had looked at her, about the vulnerability he had shared with her. 2 days later, while the children were playing in the garden under her supervision, she noticed a man standing across the street, watching the house. Her blood ran cold when she recognized the familiar posture, the way he tilted his head when he was planning something cruel. It was him. Her ex-husband had found her. She forced herself to remain calm, continuing to play with the children as if nothing had happened. But her hands were shaking and her heart was beating so hard that she was sure everyone could hear it. When she looked again, he was gone, but the fear settled in her chest like a parasite. That night, after everyone was asleep, she sat in the dark kitchen planning her escape. She couldn't stay. She couldn't put those innocent children in danger because of her problems. She couldn't risk him finding out where she was and deciding to use the family as a way to blackmail her. Can't sleep. She jumped when he appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing only pajama bottoms, his bare torso revealing defined muscles and a few scars that told the story of a difficult youth. Just thinking, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He approached and sat down in the chair next to her, so close that she could feel the heat of his skin. The intimacy of the situation, the two of them alone in the darkness, him half naked, the silence of the house around them, made her pulse race dangerously. About what? He asked softly. About how quickly 2 weeks pass, she lied partially. Tomorrow the housekeeper returns. And you might decide you don't need me anymore, she said. And there was more truth in those words than she cared to admit. The children have gotten attached to you, he said slowly. More than to anyone since their mother left us. And you? The question escaped before she could stop herself, filled with a vulnerability that scared her. He was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was husky with contained emotion. I've gotten attached too. The air between them became electrified. She could feel the tension building, the magnetic attraction that they had been trying to ignore since the first day. When he reached out and gently touched her face, she didn't pull away. There's something about you, he whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. Something that makes me want to protect you, even though I don't know what from. You can't protect me, she said in a broken voice. No one can. What are you running from? He asked, moving even closer. Who hurt you? The tears she had held back for days finally began to flow. Being so close to him, feeling his gentleness after years of brutality was almost unbearable in its intensity. "If I tell you, you'll send me away," she whispered. "Never," he said with fierce conviction. "No matter what it is, we can figure it out together." For the first time since she had arrived at the mansion, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone willing to fight for her. But before she could muster the courage to tell him the truth, the sound of a window shattering on the upper floor cut through the night like a scream. They looked at each other for a fraction of a second, pure terror passing between them, before running upstairs towards the children's rooms. Her heart pounded not only from the shock, but from the terrible knowledge that her past had finally reached the only place where she had felt safe, and as she climbed the stairs behind him, a single certainty crystallized in her mind. No matter what they found up there, her life in that house had come to an end. The man who was chasing her wouldn't give up, and she couldn't allow that family to pay the price for her freedom.